The morning of my son's wedding, I found my wife, alone in the bathroom, her silver hair scattered across the floor. My daughter-in-law filmed the whole thing for content. I said nothing until the ceremony began. I woke up on my son's wedding day to a sound that made my stomach drop. It was muffled crying coming from the bathroom. Not the happy tears kind, the kind that comes from somewhere deep inside. The kind you make when you're trying to be quiet, because you don't want anyone to hear you falling apart. The kind that catches in your throat because letting it out fully would mean admitting that whatever happened is real. The kind that sounds more like choking than sobbing. I got out of bed slowly, my joints protesting the way they do at 62 years old. I walked toward the bathroom door with that heavy feeling you get when you know something is wrong, but you don't want to confirm it. The house was one of those rented mansions near the coast in Washington state, the kind that charges $10,000 a weekend and comes with staff included. My son Brandon and his fiancée Kylie picked it specifically for the aesthetic. Everything about this wedding had been about the aesthetic. The location overlooking the bay with its perfect sunset angles. The decorations sourced from some designer in Portland who charged more per hour than I made per day when I was starting out. The guest list curated for maximum visual impact. All designed to look perfect on camera. All optimized for engagement and shares and whatever other metrics these kids measure their lives by now. The floor creaked under my weight as I approached the bathroom. The crying stopped suddenly, like whoever was inside had heard me coming and was trying to compose themselves. I pushed open the bathroom door and what I saw made me freeze in place, like someone had poured concrete into my shoes. My wife Margaret was kneeling on the cold tile floor. Her hands were pressed against her bare scalp. All around her, scattered across the white marble like silver confetti at a funeral, were long strands of platinum hair. The hair she had grown for over 30 years. The hair she swore she would never cut after her mother passed away, because keeping it long was the one physical connection she still had to the woman who raised her. Every morning for 3 decades, she had brushed that hair and thought of her mother. Every time someone complimented it, she would smile and say her mother had hair just like it. That hair had been there on our wedding day. It had been there when Brandon was born. It had been there through every milestone of our lives together. Now it was scattered across a bathroom floor in a rented mansion, and my wife was kneeling in the middle of it like she was grieving at a grave. On the sink sat a pair of hair clippers, still warm, still tangled with silver strands of evidence. The cord was neatly coiled like whoever had used it had taken time to clean up afterward. Professional, methodical, not the work of someone acting on impulse. And next to the clippers was a note, handwritten on hotel stationery. Messy script that I recognized immediately as belonging to Kylie, almost taunting in its casualness, like she was leaving instructions for housekeeping. It said, "Mom looks too old. I helped her look younger for the wedding video." I read that note 3 times. Each time it made less sense and more sense at the same time. The words were simple, but the cruelty behind them was so calculated that my brain kept trying to find a different interpretation. There had to be something I was missing. There had to be some context that would make this anything other than what it clearly was. Maybe it was some kind of joke I didn't understand. Maybe there was a wig involved, and this was part of some surprise. But there wasn't. It was exactly what it looked like. My daughter-in-law had shaved my wife's head while she slept and left a note explaining it like she was doing us a favor. Like she was some kind of fairy godmother, granting a wish nobody had asked for. Margaret looked up at me with eyes that were red and swollen, and empty in a way I had never seen before in our 35 years of marriage. She wasn't sobbing anymore. She had moved past that into something quieter, something worse. The silence of someone who has been so thoroughly violated that they don't have words left to express it. She was in shock. Her hands kept touching her head like she was trying to confirm that what she was feeling was real. Like maybe if she checked enough times, the hair would magically reappear. Her fingers kept searching for something that wasn't there anymore. She whispered something so soft I almost missed it. She said, "Maybe I really am old. Maybe I did look bad. Maybe she was right." That sentence hit me harder than the sight of her hair on the floor. Not because of what it meant about her appearance, but because after everything that had been done to her, her first instinct was to blame herself, to wonder if she had somehow deserved this, to question her own worth based on the cruelty of someone else. That's what decades of being the good mother-in-law does to a person. That's what years of being the agreeable one, the one who never makes waves, the one who smooths over every conflict and apologizes for things that aren't her fault, does to someone. It makes them apologize for being hurt. It makes them wonder if the people who hurt them had a point. I knelt down beside her on that cold marble floor. I didn't say anything yet because I didn't trust my voice. I could feel the anger building in my chest, like pressure in a sealed container, and I knew if I opened my mouth right now, nothing useful would come out. Just rage, just fury, and that wouldn't help her. So I just placed my hand on her shoulder and let her lean into me. I held her the way I used to hold her when we were young and life threw us curveballs. Before kids, before careers, before all the complications that come with building a life. The bathroom floor was freezing through my pajama pants. Her silver hair stuck to my slippers, to the fabric of my robe, to my hands when I reached down to steady myself. Everywhere I looked, there was evidence. Strands of 30 years wrapped around my fingers. I picked up the hair clipper and felt the warmth still radiating from the motor. This had happened recently, within the last 30 minutes at most, which meant Kylie had timed it perfectly. She had waited until the morning of her own wedding to do this. She had planned it so there would be no time for Margaret to process, or recover, or decide not to attend. No time to find solutions. No time to think clearly. This was not an accident. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not a joke that went too far. This was calculated psychological warfare, disguised as a prank. This was a tactical decision made by someone who understood exactly what they were doing and why. I looked around the bathroom more carefully now that the initial shock was settling into something more analytical. Everything else in the room was in perfect order. The towels were folded neatly on the rack. The window was open at the same angle we had left it the night before. The toiletries were arranged on the counter exactly as Margaret had placed them. Nothing about this room looked like chaos after an incident. It looked like a scene that had been staged and then cleaned up by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Someone who had done this before, maybe not this exact thing, but similar stunts. Practiced. Rehearsed. That's when I noticed the phone lying face down on the vanity, half hidden behind a bottle of lotion, like it had been deliberately positioned to be inconspicuous. Just visible enough that someone looking for it would find it, but hidden enough that someone not looking would miss it completely. I picked it up and the screen lit up immediately. The video recording app was still running. The live stream icon showed that the broadcast had ended less than 10 minutes ago. Viewers count, 847. Comments, disabled but reactions logged. Duration, 23 minutes and 14 seconds. I understood before my brain fully processed the implication. Kylie didn't just shave my wife's head. She recorded the whole thing. She streamed it live to almost 1,000 people while it was happening. She turned my wife's humiliation into content for strangers on the internet to consume with their morning routines. I checked the list of connected devices and found a small camera still active in the network settings. I followed the power cable hidden behind a stack of towels in the corner of the bathroom and found a tiny lens positioned at the exact angle to capture Margaret's face as she looked into the mirror. The camera was expensive, professional quality, the kind content creators use when they want crisp footage for their channels. This wasn't some improvised setup cobbled together at the last minute. This was planned well in advance. Maybe days, maybe weeks. Margaret saw the camera in my hand, and her eyes went wide with panic. The color drained from her face completely. She said, "Raymond, they can't see this. Please tell me they didn't see this." I didn't answer her. What could I possibly say? Yes, they saw it. Almost 1,000 strangers watched your humiliation in real time while you were sleeping. The moment you discovered what was done to you was broadcast for entertainment. People you'll never meet consumed your pain like morning television. I just removed the battery from the camera and slipped it into the pocket of my robe. Then I stood up and locked the bathroom door from the inside. As if that small barrier could somehow protect her from what had already been done. As if locking a door could undo a live stream that was probably already being clipped and shared across platforms. Outside the mansion, the wedding preparations were in full swing. I could hear the staff moving through the hallways, their footsteps muffled by thick carpet, but their voices carrying through the walls. Someone was arranging flowers in the main hall. Someone else was adjusting tablecloths in the reception area. The caterers had started setting up in the kitchen, and the smell of expensive brunch food was starting to drift through the building. Everything smelled like fresh roses and overpriced cologne. A perfect morning for a perfect wedding. A perfect backdrop for what was supposed to be a perfect video showcasing a perfect bride and her perfect life. The kind of content that gets millions of views when done right. The kind of content that builds careers and bankrolls lifestyles. I helped Margaret to her feet. Her legs were unsteady, like she had aged 20 years in the last hour. I guided her back to the bedroom and wrapped her in the thickest robe we had brought with us. I sat her on the edge of the bed and told her she didn't need to go anywhere right now. I told her to rest. I told her I would handle this. I told her everything would be okay, even though I wasn't sure that was true. She nodded, but her hand stayed wrapped around mine like she was afraid that letting go would make everything collapse again. Like I was the only anchor keeping her from drifting into complete despair. I stayed with her until her breathing slowed and her eyes started to close from sheer exhaustion. The body has limits. Shock has limits. Eventually, the mind shuts down to protect itself. Then I gently pulled my hand away and stepped out into the hallway. When the bedroom door clicked shut behind me, I heard her start to cry again. Not loud, just soft, broken sounds that no one was supposed to hear. The kind of crying you do when you think you're finally alone, and you can let the walls down. I walked down the corridor toward the suite where Brandon and Kylie were getting ready. My footsteps were silent on the thick carpet. The anger I had felt in the bathroom was already transforming into something else. Something colder. Something more controlled. Something more useful. The kind of focused calm that comes right before you make a decision that can't be undone. I've spent 32 years working as a senior naval architect. I designed commercial vessels for a firm based in Seattle. Ships that have to withstand conditions that would destroy most structures, pressure systems and load calculations, and failure point analyses that determine whether 100 crew members live or die. You learn very quickly in that line of work that emotion is a luxury you cannot afford when the stakes are high. Panic leads to bad decisions. Rage leads to worse ones. The only useful response to crisis is cold, methodical problem solving. Identify the variables, assess the options, execute the plan. This was one of those situations. I couldn't afford to be emotional. I couldn't afford to storm into Brandon's room and start shouting accusations. That would give them time to prepare responses, time to coordinate their story, time to position themselves as victims of an overreacting parent, time to spin this into another piece of content where they were the reasonable ones, and I was the crazy old man ruining everything. No, what I needed was information, evidence, a complete understanding of what had happened and why before I made any move at all. I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with before I decided how to respond. As I approached Brandon's suite, I heard voices coming from inside. The door was slightly ajar, not fully closed, probably left that way by staff or careless guests coming and going. I stopped just outside, not because I intended to eavesdrop, but because my body stopped on instinct when I heard what was being said. Kylie's voice was light and pleased, the voice of someone congratulating themselves on a job well done. She said, "The numbers are already climbing. We passed 1,000 views in the first 20 minutes. This is going to hit different than the other stuff. The algorithm is going to love this." Brandon's voice responded, lower and more hesitant, more aware perhaps that what had been done wasn't quite as harmless as Kylie seemed to think. He said, "It might be a bit much. Do you think she's going to make a scene? If she says anything during the ceremony, it could mess up the whole stream." Kylie interrupted him with a laugh, dismissive, confident. She said, "Relax. Old people always forgive. That's like their whole thing. By tomorrow, she'll be laughing about it. She'll probably thank me for giving her a new look, and we'll have the content to prove it went well. Everyone loves a good redemption arc. The apology video alone will probably do better than the original." Brandon was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Dad might not take it well. You know how he gets." Kylie's voice again. "Your dad's a pushover. He's been letting your mom fight his battles for 30 years. He's not going to do anything. Trust me. The worst we get is an awkward dinner conversation, and then they go back home and we never have to deal with them until Christmas. And by then, this will have blown over completely." I stood there in the hallway, motionless. Not because I was shocked. I'm 62 years old. I've seen enough of human behavior to know that people are capable of almost anything when they think there are no consequences. I stood there because I needed a moment to fully absorb what I was hearing, to let it settle into my understanding of the situation. My son knew. He wasn't just aware of what Kylie had done. He was complicit. He had participated in the planning. He had weighed his mother's dignity against potential views and followers and decided the trade was acceptable. He had calculated that Margaret would forgive, because that's what she always did. Because that's what we had trained her to believe she was supposed to do. Because for years we had modeled that behavior for her, and he had calculated that I would do nothing. Because I was, in his estimation, a pushover. A man who had spent 3 decades letting his wife handle the emotional labor of parenting and family management. A man who would accept any insult rather than create conflict. A man who could be counted on to stay silent when it mattered. He wasn't entirely wrong about my history. I had let Margaret smooth things over more times than I could count. I had retreated to my work when family dynamics got complicated. I had chosen peace over confrontation almost every time the choice presented itself. But he was wrong about what that meant. He thought my silence was weakness. What he didn't understand was that my silence was choice, and I could make different choices when the situation required it. I didn't listen any longer. I had heard enough to understand the full scope of the situation. I turned away from the door and walked back down the hallway before either of them noticed I had been there. I wasn't going to confront them yet. Confrontation without preparation is just noise. It makes you feel better for a moment and changes nothing in the long run. I needed information. I needed evidence that couldn't be denied or explained away. I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with before I decided how to respond. Back in the bedroom, Margaret was sitting upright again. She wasn't crying anymore. Her hands were folded in her lap, and her eyes had that distant look people get when they're processing something too big to hold all at once. The look of someone whose entire understanding of their family is being reorganized against their will. I sat down beside her and she reached for my hand again. We didn't speak. There was nothing to say that would fix what had happened. Nothing I could tell her that would undo the live stream, or regrow her hair, or erase the note that had blamed her for looking old. But she needed to know that whatever came next, she wouldn't be facing it alone. The hours leading up to the ceremony passed with excruciating slowness. I used that time productively. While Margaret rested, I made phone calls to people I trusted. A colleague in maritime law, a friend who worked in digital media, an accountant who had helped me structure the wedding gift I had been planning to give Brandon and Kylie. I gathered information about Kylie's online presence. I discovered that she had been building a content creator career for the past 2 years, mostly focused on prank videos and viral stunts and reaction content. Her subscriber count was modest but growing steadily, around 50,000 followers across platforms. Her engagement came primarily from controversial content. The more uncomfortable the situation, the more outraged the comments, the more views she generated. She had found a formula that worked, and she was exploiting it systematically. I found the live stream from this morning. It had been unlisted but not deleted, probably saved for future editing into a longer video. I watched the whole thing with the sound muted, tracking the viewer count and the timestamps. I watched my wife's face as she slowly realized what had been done to her. I watched her hands move to her head over and over again, as if checking would change the reality. I saved a copy to my own device. Then I saved another copy to a cloud service. Then I emailed a third copy to myself. Evidence. Redundant evidence. The kind you can't delete or claim never existed. I also learned that Brandon had been helping her behind the scenes, editing videos on his laptop late at night, managing the account finances through a shared business account, making sure content appeared at optimal times for maximum reach, responding to comments under a shared handle. They were a team, a partnership. This wasn't just Kylie's ambition that Brandon was tolerating. It was a shared enterprise, a business model built on humiliating people who trusted them, a career path funded by exploitation. The mansion had a media room that was being used as a staging area for the ceremony broadcast. Kylie had insisted on live streaming the wedding for her followers. Another content opportunity. Multiple cameras were positioned throughout the venue. A professional setup that probably cost more than my first year's salary. Lights, sound, backup equipment. I examined the technical arrangement during a quiet moment when the staff was on break. I noted which devices were connected to which accounts. I confirmed the login credentials for the main streaming system. I made copies of everything I could access. Then I returned to the bedroom to help Margaret get ready. She had been awake for most of the time I was gone, sitting in the same position, processing. When I came in, she looked at me with eyes that were tired but no longer panicked. Something had shifted in her expression. Some decision had been made internally that I wasn't yet aware of. She said, "I'm going to the ceremony." I nodded. I had expected this. She said, "I'm not going to let her see me hide." I understood exactly what she meant. This wasn't about pretending everything was fine. This was about refusing to give Kylie the satisfaction of keeping Margaret locked away like a shameful secret. It was about being visible even when visibility was painful. It was about dignity in the face of humiliation. She chose a simple dress from the options she had brought. Elegant but understated. Nothing that would compete with the bride. Nothing that would draw unnecessary attention. Then she selected a silk scarf from her suitcase and wrapped it around her head. She arranged it carefully, adjusting the folds until it looked intentional rather than desperate, until it looked like a choice rather than a necessity. She stood in front of the mirror for a long time, looking at this new version of herself, the version with no hair, the version who had been violated by someone who was supposed to become family. She didn't cry. She just looked, getting acquainted with what had been done to her, accepting reality as it was rather than as she wished it would be. Then she turned to me and asked if she looked presentable. I told her she looked like the strongest person I had ever met. She almost smiled at that. Not quite, but almost. The ceremony was scheduled for 4 in the afternoon. 200 guests were expected. We took our seats in the front row as the venue filled with people behind us. I scanned the crowd as they entered. Most of them were young, early 20s, the age demographic that follows influencers and content creators, friends of Kylie, collaborators from her network, people whose faces probably appeared in her videos, people who had probably already seen the bathroom footage and were watching Margaret to see her reaction. The few actual family members present were significantly outnumbered. My brother and his wife, Margaret's sister who had flown in from Colorado, Brandon's college roommate, and his girlfriend. Everyone else was essentially a stranger, an audience, extras in a production that was being optimized for engagement. Background characters and someone else's content strategy. I noticed Kylie's phone mounted on a small tripod near the front row. Camera aimed at the central aisle. Recording light glowing red. Everything was being captured. Everything was content. Even the ceremony that was supposed to mark the beginning of a marriage was just another opportunity to generate views. Brandon appeared at the altar looking nervous, in the way grooms are supposed to look nervous. Traditional black suit. Boutonniere that matched Kylie's color scheme. He caught my eye briefly, and I saw something flicker across his face. Not guilt exactly, more like assessment. He was trying to read my expression, trying to determine whether I knew anything, whether Margaret had told me, whether there would be consequences. I kept my expression completely neutral. I gave nothing away. Let him wonder. The music started. Some trendy song that I didn't recognize. The doors at the back of the venue opened with dramatic timing, perfectly choreographed. Kylie appeared in a designer gown that probably cost more than my first car. She was radiant in the way people who perform for cameras learn to be radiant. Every smile calculated for optimal angle. Every step choreographed for maximum visual impact. Every movement designed to look spontaneous while being completely rehearsed. She walked down the aisle with her father, a man I had met twice and spoken to for a total of maybe 15 minutes. He looked uncomfortable in his rented tuxedo, like a prop rather than a parent, like he knew his role was decorative rather than meaningful. As Kylie passed our row, she glanced briefly at Margaret, just a flicker of attention. Her eyes registered the silk scarf. Her lips twitched with something that might have been satisfaction. Then she looked away and continued toward the altar, without a single word of acknowledgement, as if the woman she had humiliated just hours earlier was furniture, as if the silver hair scattered across the bathroom floor was already irrelevant, as if none of it had happened at all. The ceremony proceeded according to script, traditional vows that seemed almost ironic given the circumstances. Promises of love and respect and commitment. Rings were exchanged. The officiant pronounced them married. Applause erupted from the assembled guests. Kylie turned to face the cameras with a smile that belonged on a magazine cover. This was supposed to be the moment when I retreated into the background, when Margaret and I performed our roles as supportive parents, when we absorbed the humiliation and pretended everything was fine, because that's what good parents do. That's what family means. You forgive. You move on. You don't make scenes. You keep the peace even when peace costs you everything. But I had already made my decision. I stood up from my seat. The movement drew attention because it was unexpected. The ceremony was over, but the reception hadn't started yet. People were still applauding. Some were taking photos. The timing of my movement was wrong for the script everyone was following. People in the front rows turned to look at me. Kylie's smile flickered slightly, a tiny crack in the performance. I walked toward the small stage where the sound equipment was positioned. The wedding coordinator tried to intercept me, her face a mask of professional concern. I waved her off without breaking stride. I had contributed significantly to the cost of this wedding, despite Kylie's family's claims that they were handling everything. I had paid for the sound system she was trying to protect. I picked up the microphone that had been used for the vows, the same microphone that had broadcast promises of love and commitment and respect. Brandon's face went pale. He knew something was coming even if he didn't know exactly what. I tapped the microphone, and the sound system gave a soft thud that silenced the room. 200 pairs of eyes turned toward me. The cameras that had been capturing the celebration now captured my face instead. The live stream viewers who had tuned in for wedding content were about to get something different. I spoke calmly, no anger in my voice, no trembling, just facts delivered in the same tone I use when presenting design specifications to clients. I said, I apologize for interrupting. This will only take a moment of everyone's time. The room went quiet, not the comfortable quiet of anticipation, the tense quiet of uncertainty, the quiet of people who sense that something is about to happen that wasn't in the program. I continued. Most of you don't know me. I'm Raymond, father of the groom. My wife Margaret is sitting right there in the front row. Some of you might have noticed that she's wearing a scarf today. There's a reason for that, and I think everyone in this room deserves to know what that reason is. Margaret looked at me with something between fear and trust. I gave her the smallest nod, an acknowledgement that I saw her, that I was doing this for her, that whatever happened next, it would be the truth. I pulled the small camera from my pocket and held it up for the room to see. This morning, while my wife was sleeping, this camera was hidden in our bathroom. It was positioned behind a stack of towels, aimed at the mirror, recording everything. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some people shifted uncomfortably. Others leaned forward with interest. While my wife slept, someone entered that bathroom and shaved her head, all of her hair. Hair she had been growing for 30 years as a promise to her late mother. Then they left a note explaining that they were helping her look younger for the wedding video. The murmur grew louder. I saw people exchanging glances, confusion, disbelief, the growing realization that they were not watching a wedding anymore. I signaled to a colleague I had positioned near the media equipment earlier. The large screen behind the altar flickered to life. The first clip appeared. No music, no dramatic editing, just raw footage from the bathroom camera. The door opening, a shadow moving in, the distinctive buzz of clippers turning on, Margaret's face as she began to wake up, her confusion turning to horror as she touched her head and felt bare skin where hair should have been. The video lasted less than 2 minutes. It felt like hours. In the crowd, people turned away. Others covered their mouths. I heard someone gasp. On Kylie's phone, mounted on its tripod, the live comments were exploding faster than anyone could read. Her carefully curated audience was watching this. Her followers were seeing this. Her smile had vanished completely. Her hand still held the phone, but her fingers were white from gripping too hard. The screen changed. The next recording played. Audio only this time. No video, just voices. Brandon's voice first, painfully recognizable to anyone who had ever heard him speak. It might be a bit much, but if the clip goes viral, it'll be worth it. Then Kylie's voice, clear and confident and dismissive. Relax. Old people always forgive. By tomorrow, she'll be laughing about it. No names were needed. No explanations were necessary. Everyone in that room knew whose voices those were. The faces of the guests told the story as realization spread like ice water through the crowd. Brandon's face had gone from pale to gray. He looked like he was going to be sick. Kylie stood frozen at the altar, her designer gown suddenly looking less like a celebration and more like a costume. I spoke again. My voice remained steady. I'm not standing here to humiliate anyone. That's not my style. I'm standing here because the truth deserves to be heard. I'm standing here because my wife deserved better than to have her pain turned into content for strangers. I pulled an envelope from my jacket pocket. Thin. No check inside. Just document. The wedding gift I prepared has been redirected. The property down payment we were planning to help with, the business investment we discussed, the trust fund we established, all of it has been reallocated to charitable causes that actually help people instead of hurting them. Kylie shook her head, forced a laugh that came out strangled. She said, "You can't just do that. That's not legal. You made promises." I looked at her directly, held her gaze. I can, and I already have. The paperwork was finalized while you were doing your makeup this morning, 3 hours ago. My attorney handled the details. I turned to Brandon, my son, the boy I had raised, the man I no longer recognized. You chose to see your parents' silence as a guarantee. You calculated that we would absorb whatever you did because that's what we've always done. Because that's what family means. Keep the peace. Don't make scenes. Forgive everything. Move on. I paused. Let the silence stretch. Today, I withdraw that guarantee. Today, you learn that patience has limits. That tolerance has limits. That love does not mean allowing yourself to be treated like a doormat forever. Brandon opened his mouth. Nothing came out. I'm not cutting you off because I'm angry. I'm cutting you off because you showed me who you are. You showed me that you're willing to hurt the people who raised you for content, for views, for numbers on a screen. That's not a mistake that requires forgiveness. That's a character trait that requires consequences. The room was buzzing now. The carefully constructed atmosphere of celebration had completely collapsed. Near the entrance, I saw the faces of professional contacts I had invited, people whose opinions mattered in Brandon's chosen industry, people who would remember this when his name came up in future conversation. I set the microphone down gently. No dramatic drop, no theatrical gesture, just the end of a statement that had needed to be made. I walked back to Margaret. She looked up at me with tears in her eyes. But they weren't tears of sadness this time. They were something else. Relief, gratitude, the emotion that comes when someone finally does for you what you couldn't do for yourself. I offered her my hand. She took it and stood with me, not rushed, not bowed. Her spine was straight and her chin was level. The silk scarf on her head caught the light from the venue's windows. We turned toward the exit. Behind us, I heard Brandon's voice calling my name. Then Kylie's. Explanations beginning, justifications forming. The defensive mechanisms of people who had been exposed spinning up to full speed. I didn't turn back. Not out of contempt, not out of anger, but because some conversations have nothing left to add. Some situations are complete when you stop participating in them. We walked down the aisle together. The same aisle Kylie had walked down minutes earlier. The same aisle where 200 people had witnessed what they thought would be a celebration. Outside the mansion, the afternoon sun was warm on our faces. A soft breeze rose from the bay, carrying the salt smell of the water. The fog that had hung over the coast that morning was gone now, burned away by sunlight. I took a deep breath. For the first time since opening that bathroom door, the air filled my lungs completely. Margaret squeezed my hand. She didn't say anything. Words weren't necessary. We walked to our car in silence. The gravel crunched under our feet. Behind us, the sounds of chaos continued inside the mansion. Questions being asked, phones being checked, the carefully constructed narrative collapsing. We drove away without looking back. Margaret sat in the passenger seat watching the coastline pass. Her hand rested on mine. After 20 minutes of silence, she spoke. I didn't think you would do that. I kept my eyes on the road. I didn't think I would have to. She nodded slowly. Then she said, "Thank you." 2 words. They carried everything. When we got home that evening, I made tea. Margaret sat at the kitchen table and removed the silk scarf. She folded it carefully and set it aside. She looked at herself in the reflection of the dark window for a long moment, then turned back to me with something new in her eyes. Not sadness. Something closer to resolve. The fallout started hitting within 24 hours. Brandon sent a text message. 4 words. "Can we talk, please?" I didn't respond. There was nothing to discuss. 3 days later, my brother called. He said Brandon had reached out to him, asking him to mediate. My brother told him that wasn't going to happen. Said he watched the video. Said he was disgusted. Said Brandon should be ashamed of himself. Brandon apparently hung up on him. Kylie's social media went private within 48 hours. But by then, the video of my speech had already been downloaded, clipped, and reposted across every platform imaginable. Someone had edited it with commentary. Someone else had done a reaction video that got more views than anything Kylie had ever posted. The content creator community she had been trying to join started distancing themselves publicly. 3 brand partnerships she had been negotiating fell through. A podcast appearance got canceled. Her subscriber count, which had been climbing steadily for 2 years, started dropping by hundreds per day. A week after the wedding, I got a call from a journalist at a Seattle news outlet. She said she was writing a story about influencer culture and accountability. She asked if I would comment. I declined. I had said everything I needed to say at that ceremony. 2 weeks later, Margaret's sister called with an update she had heard through mutual connection. The wedding gifts that guests had brought were being returned. Apparently, the marriage was already on shaky ground. Kylie blamed Brandon for not warning her that I might do something. Brandon blamed Kylie for pushing the prank too far. They were arguing constantly. The honeymoon had been cut short. I didn't feel satisfied hearing that. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt tired. 30 years of raising a son, and this is where it ended up. A month after the wedding, Brandon showed up at our house unannounced. I saw his car pull into the driveway through the kitchen window. Margaret was in the living room reading. I told her to stay there. I met him at the front door. Didn't invite him in. Just stood in the doorway and waited. He looked rough, thinner than I remembered, dark circles under his eyes. He started talking immediately, words tumbling out like he had rehearsed this speech 100 times. He said he was sorry. He said he didn't know Kylie was going to take it that far. He said he should have stopped her. He said he wanted to make things right. I listened to the whole thing without interrupting. When he finished, I asked him one question. "Did you know she was going to record it?" He hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. "Yeah," he said finally. "But I didn't think she would actually post it." I nodded slowly. "A private joke. Your mother's humiliation. That's what you thought was funny." He didn't have an answer for that. I told him that until he could take full responsibility without excuses, without blaming Kylie, without minimizing what happened, there was nothing for us to talk about. Then I closed the door. He stood on the porch for about 10 minutes. Eventually, he got back in his car and drove away. Margaret asked who it was. I told her. She nodded once and went back to her book. Didn't ask what he said. She was done too. 3 months after the wedding, we heard through the family grapevine that Brandon and Kylie had separated. She had moved back in with her parents. He was staying in their apartment alone. The content creator career was effectively over. She had deleted all her accounts. He had gone back to his regular job at a shipping company, head down, trying to ride out the embarrassment. 6 months after the wedding, Margaret and I took a trip to Vancouver. Just a long weekend. No agenda, no schedule. We walked around Stanley Park. We ate at restaurants we had always wanted to try. We sat on the waterfront and watched the boats come in. On the last night of the trip, Margaret told me she had made a decision. She was going to volunteer at a senior center near our house, help organize activities, spend time with people who might be isolated or lonely. She said what happened to her made her realize how easy it is for older people to be overlooked or dismissed. She wanted to do something about that. I told her I thought that was a good idea. A year after the wedding, Margaret's hair had grown back. She kept it short this time, a practical cut that suited her face better than the long hair ever had. When people asked about it, she just said she decided to try something new. Brandon reached out twice more during that year, once on Margaret's birthday, once on Christmas. Both times he sent cards with handwritten notes apologizing and asking if we could start over. Both times we discussed it and decided we weren't ready. Maybe we never would be. Some things can't be undone with apology. I ran into one of Brandon's old college friends at a hardware store about 14 months after everything happened. He asked how I was doing, asked about Margaret. Then he said something that stuck with me. He said, "For what it's worth, a lot of people thought what you did took guts. Most parents would have just let it slide." I thanked him and went back to shopping for Deckstain. Last month, Margaret and I celebrated our 36th wedding anniversary. We went to the same restaurant where we had our first date. She wore a blue dress that matched her eyes. I wore the tie she bought me for my 60th birthday. Over dinner, she reached across the table and took my hand. "I'm glad you did what you did," she said. "At the wedding." I never said that clearly enough, but I'm glad. I squeezed her hand back. So am I. We finished our meal. We drove home. We sat on the back porch and watched the sun set over the trees behind our house. No drama, no confrontations, no content to post. Just two people who had been through something hard and come out the other side still standing, still together. That's where we are now. And honestly, it's better here than it ever was before. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel and help us bring you more and better stories. Thanks.